So, so this session is actually in continuation of what we discussed in our previous session. So basically, we were discussing about the how to use pronouns properly. So we stopped here where we discussed about comparison, how pronouns could be used in comparison, how certain things could be omitted. This thing. So in continuation to this, I'm actually going to discuss about reflexive pronouns. I'll tell you why it is called as reflexive pronouns and what is the importance of it. And I think in the previous session also, Sai and Sina mentioned about this thing. Like they said himself, myself, ourself, when to use it, when to not use it, what is the importance of it, those things. So this session is actually, it is about that particular topic only. So basically reflexive pronoun is that the name itself is indication of reflecting yourself or reflecting someone, which means like if you're talking about certain thing like an object or any person, anything, you are reflecting the same person, like which means the subject and the object of the person should be the same. So both the subject and object should refer to the same person. So what it essentially means is if you say if the subject is I gave, I sent, or maybe I gave chocolate to myself. So I is a subject here, gave to whom? Myself. Again, both the subject and the object, both of them are actually referring to the same person. If you say Surya gave chocolate to maybe Sanjay, something like that, both the subject and object are different. That's what it means. So reflexive pronoun, what essentially it says is the pronouns should be used in such a way that both the subject and object should actually refer to the same thing. That is the main theme here.
So Surya, last time you gave chocolate to Jagdish, this time to Sanjay. What about the first?
I think in the coming sessions we can compensate that.
So each time you will give only to one person. Okay. Please proceed.
Yeah. So, as I said, the verb follows the subject. So, if the object and subject of the verb are the same, then we use reflexive pronoun. We'll see when the subject and object actually refer the same verb. We'll see those things and we'll try to understand here. So first I'll talk about the proper usage of reflexive pronoun. First of all, reflexive pronouns examples are himself, myself, ourselves. So something like this. So we'll see them. If you see here, the first point which says, Jane shook herself awake. So when you read this, Jane shook herself awake. So what it is essentially saying is, Jane is a person. That person actually shook herself awake. So basically she took the responsibility of awaking and she did it for herself. That is what it essentially means. So here herself is the reflexive pronoun. So basically it is Jane and herself, both of them are actually, the shook is the verb and both of this subject and object are actually referring to the same verb. So they are not different. Jane is the same person, herself is the same person, and they both are referring to the same verb, shook. It could be anything, any verb. If the subject and object are referring to the same thing, then we use the herself. And suppose in case, if you don't use herself and if you say Jane shook her awake, so this is not exactly giving the same meaning of what this first sentence is giving. Jane shook her awake. It gives a very different meaning, like what did she wake, like is there some other person involved in this, or it is not giving the exact sense of Jane took the responsibility of waking her awake, she only did that herself. It is not giving that same meaning. It is putting us in a different situation. So when the subject and object are actually referring to the same verb, the most appropriate usage of pronoun is herself, reflexive pronoun, herself, himself, ourself. So that is the basic difference between these two, and we'll see what are the improper usage here. Improper. So if you see the first sentence here, if you have questions, email Bob or myself. And again it says, if you have questions, email Bob or me. What do you think is the right sentence out of these two sentences? What do you think is the right one?
Second one.
Okay. So any particular reason why second one is right?
Like as you mentioned, the first one is like you are not like you're asking a different person to do it to you, like you are not doing it to yourself.
Right. So basically what it says is, if you have questions, so you, which says second person singular, email Bob or myself. So emailing is actually the verb here. So before the email, after email, if you see, you is the subject, Bob and myself is actually acting as an object. So clearly we can see subject and object are not the same person. It is referring to the different people. You is some other person other than Bob or myself. So both of these things are not referring to the same verb. So that is the reason why it is a wrong way of using it. So the actual one, it has to be, if you have questions, email Bob or me. As we know, this Bob or me, the reason why we used me is because it is in the object place, not the subject place. So that's why we used me, not I. So if you have questions, email Bob or me. So the reason is you is a different, it is referring to some other person. Bob or me is together, they are separate object. So clearly the subject and object are not referring to the same verb. That is the reason why we have to use me only, not myself. If you see the third one, if you have questions, email myself. What do you think about this sentence? Do you think it is right or wrong?
Wrong.
Yes, actually that is true. It is also wrong. So if you have questions, email myself. See, when myself could be used is, if I say, last night I scheduled an email for myself, or maybe you could say I email myself. What is myself? The only thing which can happen to myself is done by me. Like if you say, the only person who can email myself is I. Nobody can email myself. If you are saying myself, it means the myself is I, and subject and object should be the same. So myself can be used only in that particular situation, both the subject and object, I. So the perfect way to use myself is if you say, I emailed myself last night. I reminded, just to remind myself about that any particular task or something like that. So then only myself would become very appropriate. In this situation, it is definitely wrong, because clearly you is different and myself is I am. So the first person singular and second person singular are completely different. So that is why this second sentence, so this one is also wrong. So that is the case with these three sentences. So the only primary rule, the most important rule, is subject and object, if they are same, if they are referring to the same verb, then it becomes, then we can use reflexive pronoun. If not, we cannot. So that is the only rule which makes it easy actually for the reflexive pronoun topic.
One question here, Surya. So in this one, see, so I'm asking this question because I don't know the answer. So this one, let me just see in the second one, right? So if you have questions, email Bob or I. So can we use that? What's wrong with it? I'm just trying to understand.
So I is actually used in the subject form, Chaitanya. So when here, if you say you is actually starting, actually you is the person who is initiating the action. Bob or me are at the receiving end. So Bob or me is definitely the object. So we cannot use I in the object form. So I always comes in the subject form, and me comes in the object form. And again, his or there is another thing called possessive one. That is a different thing. So for everything, there will be three divisions like subject, object, and possessive. So me always comes in object form.
Okay, got it. Understood.
We can use I in this sentence only when you say, I will mail Bob and maybe some other person. So here I is coming at the subject. So I only takes the subject position. Me takes the object.
And in this kind of a situation, an easier way to identify whether me or I would be like the tip that Surya gave. If we just remove that word or and just read the sentence, we never say email I, right? So we say email me.
Okay, got it.
So if we put or, that should also take the word me.
Okay, got it.
Right, yeah, that's correct. So yeah, so these are the examples for proper usage and improper usage. And just like any other movie, there would be some twists and there will be some climax. So reflexive pronoun is also not an exception. So here also there is a twist here to this topic. So exceptions. So we'll see them. So they also play important part here. So if you see the first sentence, just look at the first sentence. It says, the Grinch carved the roast beast. So this is what it says. So, and the second sentence is, the Grinch himself carved the roast beast. Can anyone say which one is right and which one is wrong?
I think both are correct.
Yeah, that is true actually. So both of... Yes, Chetna?
What does it mean? Grinch carved the roast beast.
Grinch is the person, Chaitanya.
Okay.
Carved. So they are talking about a person basically. Actually, it is a famous novel.
Okay.
Grinch is, I think, the king. I think in that particular novel. So the sentences are taken from that novel. So
the Grinch is the name, is it?
Yeah, Grinch is the name. Carved the roast beast. That's what it says. And actually, both of the sentences are wrong. Right. Both of the sentences are right, and both of them have a very different meaning. Even though both of them has some similar theme, but there is a difference here. What it says is, the first one says Grinch carved the roast beast. So you're basically saying this person, some person as Mr. X or Mrs. X has done something, some action. So basically, it is saying that thing. So Surya ate chocolate, or Surya made dosa, or Surya read that book. Basically, that is what this first sentence is saying. But if you see the second sentence, the Grinch himself carved the roast beast. So we are using himself. So we are taking the scope and putting himself here. The reason why we are doing is to just give an emphasis to Grinch. The reason is, if you see, Grinch is not the normal person. If you are using some Mr. X or Mr. Y, you can simply say Mr. X made those, or Mr. X made this thing, or he carved the roast. But the fact that Grinch is the king, he is not a normal person. He never does such things. There are so many people who could assist them, who can delegate these tasks. And these tasks are not very normal things for Grinch. It happens once in a while, or it never happens. So the situation is such that the Grinch he's in forest, or he's stuck in something else. So with no other option left, he himself carved the roast beast. So himself is acting here as adding some extra emphasis and making it more dramatic. Usually authors, or in the novels, or maybe in other things, they put emphasis because they want to bring the dramatic aspect in this thing. Because if you say that person, say Raju usually takes 12 rickshaw rides in a single day usually. So he is a very hard worker. If you say this thing, it becomes a different thing. Suppose if there is some other CM, Chief Minister has come, the Chief Minister, he himself took the rickshaw and went. So this is not like a regular rickshaw wala. It is something which happens very rarely. So himself is used in such a way, even though the subject and the object clearly not referring to the same carved, the same verb. Because if you say it is not actually referring to the same one, but still you use himself only when you want to add emphasis to this thing. So this is the only exception for the reflexive pronoun. So two important rules. The first rule is subject and object always have to refer to the same verb. Then we can clearly use reflexive pronoun, himself, or herself, or myself there. If it is not, then we cannot. And there is only one exception, just to bring the dramatic aspect, or to put emphasis on the subject, or whichever subject we are using, just to add emphasis, to bring the dramatic aspect, we use this thing. So these are the two important rules in the reflexive pronoun. So actually that is what I have prepared for today.